Hey guys, Candice Malcolm here with True North. We're live this Tuesday afternoon. I want to talk to you about a couple of different stories that are going on in the news today. As per usual, there was this bizarre exchange. I'm going to get to it a bit more in more detail, but basically, the conservative immigration critic Michelle Rempel gave a press conference in Burnaby where she proposed something that's like pretty straightforward, pretty run of the mill. In fact, it's something that conservatives have long been calling for. And the liberal immigration minister, in response, just gives a really completely over the top response and kind of accuses her of saying something that she really didn't say. Reminds me a lot of a 2006 liberal campaign ad that just totally did not work out as planned. It just completely failed. And so we're going to go through that today. We had a breaking news report this morning with True North. My colleague Graham Gordon and I broke the news of the huge spike, a dramatic surge in asylum seekers coming from Mexico. So the report basically found that Canada was on track to almost double the number of asylum seekers welcomed from Mexico from 2017 to 2018. The numbers just skyrocketed. So a bit of background on that issue. We used to have a big problem in Canada of Mexicans who came to Canada as visitors. They claimed that they were coming to visit Canada, and they just never left. They put forth an asylum claim. They claimed asylum. One year we had almost 10,000 claimants. I think it was 2008. We had like 9,800 or something like that. The big problem, of course, is that most of those people are not refugees. They're not bona fide refugees. About 90% of the cases would either be withdrawn by the applicant, which mostly just meant that they left. They left Canada, so they come, claim asylum, and they never actually go through the formal process of going in front of a judge. We don't know what would happen to them. We don't know if they'd go on and try to get into the United States from Canada, or if they'd go back to Mexico, and the rest just had their claims rejected. So it was getting really expensive, getting really out of hand. The conservative government, when it was Stephen Harper who was prime minister, implemented a visa. So all it meant was that people coming from Mexico visiting Canada, whether they wanted to go on a ski trip or on a cruise or sightseeing or visiting friends or family, they just had to get a visa. In the same way as me as a Canadian, when I want to travel to a host of countries, and I've been through this because I love traveling, but you know, when I went to Brazil, I had to get a visa. When I went to Australia, I had to get a visa. When I went to Russia, I had to get a visa. It's pretty common in a lot of the world that you have to apply for a visa before you can go to a country. And so Canada put the visa requirement on Mexico, and the number of asylum claims absolutely plummeted. Like it fell down to like double digits. Like by 2013, 2014, we had like 80 claimants a year. The Liberals and Justin Trudeau ran on a campaign promise to get rid of that visa. The Mexicans always hated it, and it was kind of like embarrassing to them, so they didn't want it. And basically, Trudeau was pandering not to Canadians, interestingly, but to Mexicans. So his campaign pledge wasn't to Canadians, it was to Mexicans, that they could travel to Canada visa-free. That happened, and lo and behold, huge spike in asylum claimants. We're not quite back up to the highs that we used to have, where we'd have 10,000 a year, but we had 2,500 in 2018 up until October. So the first 10 months of the year, it's going to end up being higher. Take that from the 80 that we used to have a year, now up to 2,500, and the cost associated with that. So check out that report. It's an exclusive that myself and our investigative journalist Graham Gordon put out. You can find it on True North social media page, social media, and on our website, which is now tnc.news. So tnc.news is the new website where you can find all of our reports and all of our news. So with that, let's get to the story I want to talk about, which is this ridiculous comment by the immigration minister accusing conservatives of wanting to militarize the Canadian border. So let's get this clip up and running here. This is going to be, if I can get this clip to play, which my Wi-Fi has been acting up a little bit, then I will play it. Here we go.
They don't have a plan. You know what their plan is? To militarize the border and place a CBSA official or an RCMP official every 100 meters. We don't have the resources for that kind of
Okay, I just really want to slow this down. I'm going to play this clip a couple times because I just want to break it down what he's actually saying. So this is in response to Michelle Rumpel gave a press conference. Michelle Rumpel is a conservative immigration critic. I'll play part of her press conference. She was in Burnaby, and she basically just said that the conservatives are calling on Parliament to do an extra review when it comes to screening and vetting of migrants and asylum seekers coming to Canada. So all they're saying is we want more screening, and we want to look at the screening procedures that the government currently has in place and see if we can improve them, which is a pretty bland, pretty generic, pretty conservative proposal. It's nothing groundbreaking, nothing earth-shattering, nothing really to fearmonger about. So this is a response that the Liberal immigration minister has to that. Okay, so he says, I haven't seen anything from the Conservatives. They don't have a plan. Okay, so that's a pretty bold statement. They say he's saying that they're just criticizing us, but they don't have their own plan. So take that point that he just says. They don't have a plan. And then listen to the next thing he says.
Their plan is to militarize the border and place a CBSA official or an RCP official every 100 meters. We don't have.
So how can you not have a plan? And then he says, do you know what their plan is? To militarize the border, to put a CBSA official every 100 meters. Well, it's one or the other, right? You can't say simultaneously that they don't have a plan, but that also that their plan includes something as ridiculous as putting a CBSA official every 100 meters across a border that spans the entire continent. Like, I've never heard anyone call for that. I've never heard anyone actually say, do you know what we need? We need a full military presence or a full Canadian Border Services presence across the entire border. I don't think anyone's arguing that. In fact, there are 2 locations across the entire Canada-US border where the overwhelming majority, like 98, 99% of illegal crossings take place. Roxham Road in rural Quebec and Emerson, Manitoba, rural Manitoba. Those are the 2 locations. So I don't think that anyone's ever called for a CBSA official every 100 meters across the border. Maybe just those 2 locations, right? Those 2 locations. But somehow the immigration minister is accusing the Conservatives of both not having a plan and that their plan is something so absurd that it's akin to militarizing the border. So I think that accusation is just pretty absurd. I'll just play it through so you can see his whole comments here.
I haven't seen anything from the Conservatives. They don't have a plan. You know what their plan is? To militarize the border and place a CBSA official or an RCP official every 100 meters. We don't have the resources for that kind of.
Nobody's calling for that.
Half-baked, impractical plan. And by the way, we've been talking to Canadians before we got into office, after we got into office for the last 3 years and more. Consultations. I do town halls everywhere that I go. So does the Prime Minister and everyone else. To get feedback on some of the programs that are working so well in immigration, such as the Global Skills Strategy. It came from the community. When did the Conservatives start to talk to Canadians about immigration? Last fall. That's when they got around to talking to Canadians.
Okay, so that's enough. But anyway, you can tell we're in full-on campaign mode. It's not. We're not now talking about policy. We're not talking about what's best for Canadians. We are comparing the Liberals to the Conservatives, and he's criticizing the Conservatives for not talking to Canadians. I just find it kind of absurd that he would accuse them of militarizing the border when, again, nothing to that sort has been called for. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and show you parts of Michelle Rumpel's press conference here. Let me just pull it open here because so basically she was speaking in Burnaby, British Columbia. This was on January 16th, so it was last week. There's a by-election happening in Burnaby, so she was there with the Conservative candidate. And then also just, Burnaby, British Columbia's location, sadly, of the tragic crime that took place in the summer of 2017 when 13-year-old Marissa Shen was murdered. The person accused of murdering her is a Syrian refugee who is believed to have come to Canada under Trudeau's Syrian refugee program, which was totally rushed, totally out of control. I wrote an entire book about how terrible Trudeau's plan was when it came to Syrian refugees and the threat and the risk that we face in the way that they did it, not necessarily in bringing Syrians to Canada. I think that Canada probably should have brought some Syrian refugees. I probably would have preferred that we brought the people who are being persecuted, like the Yazidis and the Syrian Christians. Anyway, there was a lot to criticize about the way that Trudeau brought in those Syrian refugees. Sadly, a young Canadian was killed allegedly by one of those Syrian refugees. So Michelle Rumpel was in Burnaby, and this is what her press conference looked like. If I can get this to load. Let's see here. Well, if I can try to summarize it. Basically, she just talked about a few instances of known criminals, like known people who had criminal records, people who had extensive criminal records, who were able to come to Canada. The examples that she brought up were folks who came through the border. So they crossed illegally, and then for some reason they were able to stay. So she points to those issues. She brings up the fact that a young girl was killed in Burnaby from allegedly because of a refugee by a refugee. That hasn't been proven in court yet, but court case is going underway later this month. Whoops. And anyway, my video is not going to load here. I'll give it a second and see if it loads. And then she calls, basically her call is for Parliament to study the issue. She's saying that she is calling for the same thing that the Conservatives called for last year and the year before, which is just a study and a review of the security procedures and protocol, and that it needs to be reviewed. So that's not really anything groundbreaking. It's certainly not a call for the militarization of the Canadian border, and certainly not a call for a CBSA officer every 100 feet or every 100 meters, as the immigration minister mistakenly claimed. This is just all reminds me of this ad. This is what I tweeted. This is what I alluded to. But this is the ad for folks who are too young or who don't remember. In 2006, this was the ad that the Liberals played. The quality is really bad. It just shows you how much better we've gotten at technology in the last 12 years or 13 years. But this was the ad that the Liberals ran, trying to kind of drum up fear against the Conservatives and what a Conservative government would stand for. And so this is how they were trying to paint Stephen Harper.
Stephen Harper actually announced he wants to increase military presence in our cities, Canadian cities. Soldiers with guns in our cities, in Canada. We did not make this up.
Ooh, scary. Those scary, scary, scary Conservatives. They wanted to militarize Canadian cities. Of course, the reality was really anything but what was portrayed in that ad. The ad immediately got pulled. Like, they played it, and it just very quickly got mocked and ridiculed by everyone, and the Liberals pulled it. It was kind of like prime fear-mongering by the Liberals against the Conservatives, and it really just kind of it was ridiculous. The idea that we're like militarizing our country kind of negates the idea that those would be Canadian soldiers in the cities, not like some foreign occupation. Like, they made it sound like it was like, the Nazis are coming or something like that. They were Canadian soldiers. I've got the actual policy here that the Conservatives were proposing at the time, and then the Liberals really just spun it out of context to an absurd extent, and they had to withdraw that, and then they ended up losing the election. So interesting stuff. Let's just see what the actual, it was like, the proposal was to have like 100 additional soldiers being available in cities or something like that. It was something like super minor, and the Liberals turned it into that campaign ad. So again, we're kind of back to where we were a decade ago or longer, where we have the Liberals just sort of making stuff up and fear-mongering against the Conservatives for pretty straightforward policies. I wish that the Conservatives would go even further in their proposals and what they're saying. Like I said, I obviously don't think that we should militarize our border. I don't think that we should build a wall across the border. However, when there's two locations, we know that Roxham Road in upstate New York going into Quebec, accounts for 95% of all illegal crossings into Canada. Okay, maybe not build a wall across the whole border, but why don't you start at the location where 95% of the crossings happen? That would be a pretty good place to start. You don't need to militarize the whole border or place CBSA officials across the whole border when 95% are happening in one location. Why don't you just stop the crossings at that one spot, which could be done with a fence? I visited that location, Roxham Road. I did some reporting from there last May. And, there's a big sign that says it's illegal to cross. And everyone knows that they just ignore that. They walk in. The Canadian government actually built a land bridge. Like, it used to be a ditch that went down, and they filled it in so that the migrants would no longer have to walk through a ditch. They just kind of walk across this like filled in area right to where the Canadian officials are. Canadian officials say, like, stop, you're about to be arrested. What you're doing is illegal. Are you sure you want to cross? And the migrants, like, they've been trained. They've spoken to, obviously, like a human smuggler or someone in their community, because they know, if I was in a foreign country and a police officer told me to stop what I'm doing, and if I continue forward, I will be arrested. There's no way that I'm going to continue forward, right? But obviously the people who are crossing here have been coached. They've been told, just, ignore the police. They'll tell you to stop. Just ignore them. Say that you want to get arrested. Go in. They get arrested. I didn't see anyone get handcuffed. I didn't see anyone get detained. They just bring them in, and then that's when they start processing them and filling out their asylum claim form. So there's basically no punishment. They supposedly get screened, and if they have a national security red flag, then they get kicked out. But that, I don't think that happens very often. And as Michelle Rumpel brought up in that press conference she did, unfortunately I couldn't get the video to load, but we can share, we'll share parts of that press conference a little later on True North. She has a couple of examples, really bad dudes, really bad people that were able to cross the border illegally and manage to get their way into Canada despite having national security red flags that were known about by Canadian officials. So again, calling for screening review isn't militarizing the border, and frankly, building a wall or building a fence and blocking people from entering at that one spot at Roxham Road would also not be militarizing the border. It would simply be enforcing the border laws. Again, there's a big sign that says it's illegal to cross, and yet we had, I think something like 20,000 people crossed illegally last year. It was like basically the same as the year before. We had 55,000 asylum claims last year compared to 50,000 the year before, so that number is going up. And whatever the government is doing is not working. I'd like to see the Conservatives come out with a much more detailed plan and a much more aggressive plan. Frankly, the Liberals are going to throw everything at them. They're going to accuse them of putting soldiers with guns in our cities and at our borders, but I think that a lot of people would be okay with that if it meant that we were, stopping the flow of illegal immigration, that we were stopping the gravy train for illegal migrants coming into Canada, and that we were securing our border. So I'm going to leave it at that today. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. And don't forget to check out our new website, tnc.news. We've got that report you really want to see about Mexican asylum seekers coming to Canada and the massive spike that Canada has experienced since the Trudeau government got rid of that visa. The visa worked. The visa policy worked. It got rid of the problem that we had with thousands, tens of thousands even, of Mexican asylum seekers. Canada fixed the problem, got rid of it. For some reason, we don't know why, Trudeau reversed it, and now we've got the problem. It's back again. So check out that report, and thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week.